Hello, and welcome to the Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them. I'm Barbara Field, licensed marriage and family therapist in Sacramento, California, and I specialize in treating trauma and addiction and attachment and grief. So I created this channel as a place for people with all kinds of losses to come and find other people who are telling the same story and make it just okay that you're grieving the way you're grieving. And so today I have invited Steve Siler and Brian Parker from Music for the Soul to join me and talk to me and us about grief. So Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Barbara, thank you so much for having me today and for having Brian as well. Uh, I'm really pleased to be here. We are a ministry that deals with the things that put people into crisis, the trauma, and certainly loss. All kinds of loss are part of that. When you talk about grief, immediately our project for people who have lost a loved one comes to mind. But what I've learned in doing this ministry is there's all kinds of other losses. Our caregiving project, which deals with the loss of your place in life, what you used to be able to do, who people used to be, and as they change, what that means for us in terms of loss. We did a project specifically for miscarriage and stillbirth. We did a project specifically for those grieving the loss of a loved one to a suicide, which is a very different type of grief. We did a project called Mercy Great Enough for those who find that they have remorse over an abortion in their past. So again, a different type of grief. And you mentioned addiction in your open, and of course addiction can also be a type of loss as you look at the life you had before and what that addiction has done to you. And we've done several different projects. We've done a project on eating disorders. We've done a project on pornography addiction, and many, many more. And all of them, I feel like, contain an element of loss as we try to find what's next for us to live in this present moment, based on what we've experienced and how we've come through it and how the Lord is helping us heal from it. So
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So, Brian,
Yep.
tell
And
us
I'm
what
Brian Parker. I am the brand new director of vision and outreach for Music for the Soul. My goal is to get it out there, cast a vision for the future, and to make sure that we have just amazing reception from people like you, Barbara, who we can connect and say, you know what, this works for us as well. So very, very thankful to be part of the team now. The board of directors and Steve have been nothing but kind. Their vision for those who are in crisis is unbelievable, unmatched. And we just want this to be outreached to those who need it. We are a nonprofit, so if you need it, we're going to give it to you. But at the same time, it's how to get the word out there and how to make Music for the Soul more relevant in today's day and age.
That's great. So help me understand how you connect with the community, like how you partner with different people. So you have this vast warehouse of resources and wisdom, just your website. I could wander around there for days. So what does it look like when it goes out into the world and takes flight?
I'll start, Brian, and then you can fill in where I miss it. When I began this ministry, I had just come out of a long career as a contemporary Christian music staff songwriter. So I had connections with radio. Y'all remember radio? And we did full-length albums, CDs, and we did documentaries, videos, DVDs. And so it was through those kinds of channels, typical, I would say, Christian media promotion channels, we were able to get a lot of attention for projects quickly because of the songs that I'd written in contemporary Christian music that people were aware of, kind of gave me a platform. But of course, as the years have gone on, the way people consume music and share music has changed. There are positives and negatives to that, but it requires a constant recalibration of the way we share. But one of the primary ways that we love to share is the way we're sharing today, because you're the person as a therapist who's on, I call it the front lines. You're the person who's going to have someone come in their office, and you're the one who can say, you know what I think you need to listen to today, and then share the song. Because what we know from Music for the Soul and the brain science is that music moves us because we store trauma in the right hemisphere of our brain. That's where the melodies go. So we can cut to the chase, so to speak, in a way that's supportive and nurturing and loving. And because of the memory device of melody, people tend to remember more of what you sing to them. So it's just a tool that we want people like yourselves on the front lines to be able to utilize. So then it becomes really a word of mouth thing. If you feel it's effective, who do you know that do you think would be blessed by it?
Yeah, we have 250 plus songs. We've got devotionals, we've got documentaries. We have a documentary coming out soon. We have somebody's daughter documentary. We have resources that are there. Of course, your website, you go there, you can get it. But the idea is we know that when we have these crisis topics and we put it on social media, no one's going to go, ooh, abuse. I can't wait to watch that video. Or addiction. Oh, it's so great. Like, because we have a very unique challenge. And that's to say, do we put this all over social media where people can get triggered and maybe it's not the right time for them to hear a certain song or read a certain devotional or a study guide or watch one of our documentaries. And so I'm trying to find a way to use people like you, Barbara, and other people in the world who are really knowing the impact of a guided song experience.
Mhm.
Where, yes, we would love to have songs that people can clap and sing. We do have Love's Just a Wag Away, a dog song, by the way. We'll get to that later. But we do understand that it's a hard sell when people are not in crisis, but it's an easy sell for those who are at their last rope, desperate for change. And they have this one moment with their counselor or therapist and they say, let's listen to something together. And I want you to tell me what you feel afterwards. That's a breakthrough as Music for the Soul when I first came on board that I understand is so much more powerful than the awards, accolades, the clicks, the likes. However, if we got all that because of the effectiveness of the client therapist, relationship, we are on board and we would love to help. So it's not about us, it's about them. Steve said to me one day, and I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. The people who sing the songs are not the artist. The person listening to the song is the artist. They're the ones that they can put themselves into the song and actually live it and perform it in their heart, mind, and soul. So that's where we're at. And that's the kind of excitement we get to engage in every day.
So let's talk about grief specific. So how have you figured out which songs for different kinds of grief or different kinds of people? Because I know that's, it's not exactly like you're going to have a forum where people give you feedback about the songs in the middle of their grieving, just like my channel. No one typically wakes up and says, let's go find a channel all about grief.
Right.
So it's very narrow on who wants to come to my page and engage with the lovely people who have shared their time and experience with me. Same thing with you, that there's a small market, and then getting yourself out there to those people who can benefit from it, like Brian said, without totally freaking them out. How do you balance that? How do you do that?
Well, with grief, what makes grief different is, especially when you're talking about the grief that comes from the loss of a loved one or a friend, all of us experience that. This is not a niche marketplace. If you want to refer to it as a marketplace, which I don't like that language, but I think it helps people understand what we're talking about. So there is literally no one on the face of the earth who will not at some point need support for grieving. And everybody has to walk through that. So one of the most important ways we approach all of these topics is we don't write any songs just based on how we're feeling about something. We engage with professional therapists. In the case of the Drink Deep album, which is the grief project I was referring to,
Great album.
we engaged with grief counselors and said, okay, what do we need to say? What are the topics that we need to talk about in the healing process? I refer to it as the arc of healing. Let's just say you just found out that somebody you love died. And the first response is probably, no. I remember when I told my wife that her father had passed, her first response was to physically shove me away. No, this can't be happening. So that's where the grief project starts. It starts with no, and then moves through the steps, through various steps of grief towards finally freedom in Christ. At the end, death has been conquered. But you don't do that like this. It's a process, and it's a long, arduous journey that we go on, and it's not orderly either. We jump from step 3 to step 7, back to step 2, over to step 5. Just we can be ambushed and be just thrown into complete chaos out of nowhere, like by hearing something, smelling something, seeing something. So giving somebody a 14-song project like Drink Deep allows them to have the whole panorama of it, if you will, and revisit songs as they need to based on where they find themselves in the process. And as a therapist, you might have a client go, oh, they are so needing song number 7 today, or oh, wait a minute, they need song number 3, But by trying to have the whole arc of healing covered, then I feel like we empower the therapist and the listeners to decide what it is that they need to hear.
And Barbara, I would love if we can do before the end of this podcast is to share just a little tiny sample of Drink Deep, which is one of my favorite songs on the Drink Deep album. And it's just the first 10, 20 seconds. It just has such a welcoming, inviting way to say, be where you are. And that's where we really feel like our songs take people. It's just be where you are. And I'm hopefully by the end we can listen to that.
To validate what they're feeling. I feel like, if we're going to say this is of God, then of course God knows our most intimate thoughts, knows our deepest pain, and is present with us in it. And so I always get excited when people have the "that's me" response, or you put into words and song what I was feeling but couldn't express. So that's where the deep joy in this work comes from, is helping people know they're not alone. Other people understand and have been where they are, and especially that God is with them in it.
And so how do you educate therapists? Therapists are often, I've found a way to be with clients. I've been doing it for 27 years. Don't ask me to add anything else. I'm going to retire pretty soon. So how do you convince therapists of the brain science and the efficacy and the benefits for them and their clients to adding a music dimension to what they offer people?
Well, yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking of all the conferences I've been to where the therapists gather around the book tables, because therapists have been through education and that's been the model. And I get that and understand that. Yet I would imagine that every therapist has personally experienced hearing a song and time traveling. Like they're instantly back in high school. They're instantly back in an old relationship. Music has a way, like I said earlier, of cutting to the chase. So there's not a steep learning curve here. If you understand that music has that power and that music can draw out emotions that lie dormant or buried, or even that somebody has I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to put up a wall. Well, guess what music does? It seeps through the cracks in your wall. Or if you shut the door, it goes underneath the door. It's going to get to your heart, right? And so that's what I would say to therapists is it's just another tool in the toolkit to help you get your client where you want them to be, to hear and understand the thing you're trying to share with them. And also for them to be able to identify their own feelings. Yes, that's how I feel. And I always say if there's a song about it, then you're not the only person who's ever felt this way. Because I think that's what tends to happen, is that we isolate and we begin to think, oh, it's never been this bad. Nobody's ever been as grief-stricken as me. Nobody's ever been as shameful or guilt-ridden as I am. No, if there's a song about it, immediately that isolation piece falls away. You bring it out into the light where the healing happens.
Yeah, that's so true. That's basically the goal of my channel, is for people to hear other grieving people talk, or to hear a panel of wonderful therapists who are passionate about treating grief and think, oh, I could go to therapy. I
Mhm.
could get my needs met.
Yeah.
And also to just help people understand grief is never over, just like life is never over.
Hmm.
You don't ever get off the roller coaster, just
Right.
going up and down. So for people to think, all right, now if I do this stuff and listen to these songs, I'll be back the way I was. The pain will be gone and everything will be good.
You remind me of our song "No Such Thing as Normal Anymore," which is on the project, which of course there is a new normal. But the normal you used to know before your mom or dad died, or your best friend, or whatever it may be, or the job you used to have, or you name it, that normal is over. You know, is there a new normal? Is there a new present that God is in with you that you can walk forward? Yeah, but to think, I'm past that now. I'm never going to feel that again. Yeah, life is more complex than that for sure.
So talk to me about how you hand people off then to therapy. Because like you said earlier, Brian, people can get triggered walking through the grocery store.
Right.
Never mind
Anything.
listening to stimulating music or the
Mhm.
lovely, just the listening to your songs, the voice quality and the resonance. I, who have done a lot of therapy, can really feel my right hemisphere going, uh-oh. And so
Mm.
how do you then hand people off for the grief groups or therapy or whatever will help them now go take that awakened part of them that's ready to have deeper healing and accomplish that?
Well, I think you made a good point at the beginning where you talked about the way that people connect to a song. But then what? What next? The song isn't the healer. It's the beginning, it's the foundation of that handoff to the therapist or handoff to the counselor. It's a tool that I've used as a teenager in my room by myself, hearing a song and going, I want to hear that again, you know? And the thing that we really want to emphasize at Music for the Soul is we want that easy bridge between our nonprofit and the counselor and the therapist. Because I've listened to this, I need the resources. I need to find someone that I can. And we do have an opportunity there to outreach and use a therapist to partner with us and to be part of our vision and outreach. However, the best thing we can do is give it in the hands of those, like Steve said at the beginning, who are in the front lines. And it's not that they stumbled upon our songs, it's that they were given it. And once they receive it and they love it and enjoy it and are affected by it, they go back to the person who shared it and said, what next? And then they can say, well, I talked to this person and you can see the counselor that I'm seeing. It's not our responsibility technically to find or to refer to a specific person or group. It's to give all groups our tools, and the handoff is just natural. Does that make sense?
Great.
Yes, and I always, I always say to people, look, we are not a professional counseling organization. I don't want to misrepresent that. And I encourage everybody who's dealing with any kind of trauma, loss, crisis, to find a professional counselor or pastor or both
Mm.
that they can talk to. Obviously, when you're going through something really, really tough, sometimes it's a close friend or a what's the word I'm looking for here? Well, never mind. It's a close friend and or family member that is that's what I was trying to think of, that is walking with you. And oftentimes we will have people like that, a close friend or a family member, play a song for somebody. Would think, oh, my friend needs to hear this.
Yeah.
Right? So I prefer obviously that people ultimately wind up in the hands of a professional counselor because I think counseling can sometimes get a bad has sometimes had a bad name in the church, but as far as I'm concerned, any church that doesn't have an
Still has.
outreach to a professional Christian therapist is not really doing their job, because the church ought to be the hospital, right? That ought to
Mhm.
be the place where people go
Yeah.
to get guided. And pastors, bless their hearts, they did not go to seminary to learn how to be experts on eating disorders or drug abuse or you name it, all the different issues that are sitting out there in the pews. So, to the extent that we can empower them to have resources to turn to as well, is a really positive thing.
True. So then do you have any formal efforts to sort of educate therapists? Like, I'm all about the brain science. So I do body-based therapies like EMDR, brain spotting, comprehensive resource model. A lot of the people I've interviewed, there's lots of these kinds of therapy, and I'm trying to get them on here as well as traditional talk therapy but to help people understand, like, what does your brain actually need, what's actually happening, and why is it good for you, and why does it heal you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any sort of educational workshops that, like, I can share with my therapist buddies or my drug and alcohol counseling buddies?
We've done podcasts. We have a podcast, and we've done podcasts and interviewed guests on these topics, just like you have. We've done some blog posts. We've written about it in books. So yes to all of the above, and always looking for more ways to share.
If you go to the website too, sorry to interrupt, Steve, there's a menu button and there's a search. So if you go to therapists, or it says, you'll see all of our resources for therapists. You'll see all of our resources for churches. We have a great sheet that has all of our songs categorized by each issue, and it kind of just shows you through. We also, if you want to go deep, it has our why. It has the brain science behind it. It has what we're so our website is probably the number one thing if you want to go to the menu and go to the search and look through all of the resources, depending on what you're looking for: grief, abortion, pornography, addiction. It's all there to be read up on. And then you can also go to our store and buy our books and buy our study guides as well. And then we have a lot of references to the songs and the stories and the testimonies of why it was written in the first place, which is great for counselors to be aware of as well.
Brian, let me just rephrase what you said. You used the word buy. Everything on our website is downloadable for a gift of any amount, literally any amount, because we never want money to be the reason that somebody doesn't get what they need. Everything streams, so all the songs can be heard without paying anything. But if you want a song, if you think it's worth $10, great. If you think it's worth 5 cents, great. We don't assign a price to that stuff. The only things that you can buy are physical copies. If you want a physical copy of a book, there are fixed costs to create that. So those things we have the ability to purchase those, but everything else is downloadable for a gift of any amount.
That's great.
Which to me seems crazy.
I'm sorry, Brian, what?
Sorry, which to me seems crazy. You want to advance a vision and something to make. And we're really trusting in God and trusting in what we're doing is real, to say, hey, give us what you feel this is worth. Because nowadays people listen to music for what? Free. People, they don't realize there's value in music anymore, or value in ministry even, or, you have to pay to have a certain service. But we're so desperate for people to get the songs that they want. And we're saying 99 cents. That's it as the minimum, or a penny, whatever you put in there, you will be able to get what you need.
That's great. That is a really tough catch-22, right? Like having a YouTube channel, all the stuff they feed you is how to get rich on YouTube. And my goal is not how to get rich on YouTube, but how to get my materials to the people that will benefit from them. Because I think you can almost assume that nobody's going to get rich on a YouTube channel that just talks about grief. And but the good news is the trolls don't come to my page either. Trolls like to take people that are having a good time and cause them to have a bad time. Well, on my page, we start at the bad time and try to help it a little better of a time. So they don't really have a place there.
Well, Disney had a little bit of a formula where the dad or the mom dies at the beginning of the movie, and then all of a sudden they find that trajectory. So it is instinctively in our entertainment, that conflict, that sadness, and then Pumbaa and Timon come up out and Hakuna Matata, and then they get out of it. But there is always that tragedy at the beginning of every I say this to my kids, I would never want to read a book where nothing happens.
Right.
Something has to happen for it to be interesting.
Mhm. That's
So
true.
we understand, I think, if that's the understanding of our nature, to see, wow, I'm drawn to this drama and I want to see if they can get out of it. That's the beauty of music for the soul and what we do as well.
That's great. And with grief, the tough part is there is no magical Disney ending. Some people have the resources for that, but some
Mhm.
people get 3 days bereavement leave and have to go back to work to feed their children. So
Yeah.
they don't have time for all of that. And helping people to find the tomorrow in a story that looks like surviving till bedtime,
Mhm.
that's the tough part.
I prefer the Shrek ending where they're both, the new normal is that they're ogres and they don't have to be anything more than they are. It's like, wow, I can embrace, say, you're beautiful. Really? Yeah. That kind of ending, I think, was a great contrast to the Disney,
Happily ever after.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you for kind of outlining what's on your webpage. I've been kind of overdosing on your webpage since
Oh,
you
thank you.
Yeah.
since you contacted me, and my brain is just swimming with everything that's in there. But there is so much there, and for you to just describe it like that is great.
There is on the therapist page, by the way, there is a how to use document that gives some guidance for therapists who are wondering, music, how do I do, what do I do with this? So there is that. And
Cool.
and we're always looking for therapists to give us more suggestions for how they've used it, because we hear stories that just floor me.
Mm.
I think one of my favorites was a therapist who reached out and said, "Hey, I used the last song on the Somebody's Daughter project to remarry a couple in my office. They danced to the song as to rededicate their wedding vows." And like, dude, really? Stuff that we never would even imagine as we're writing and recording the song. So I encourage therapists to be as creative as they want to be. There really are no rules when it comes to that.
And
Cool.
Barbara, I'm going to just be bold here, and I know we have to leave, but I wanted to leave on this note. Can you see that okay?
That's great.
All right. This is Drink Deep.
Weep if you want to. You don't have to put a brave face on for me. Rage if you're angry. This is not the time to keep things nice and neat. Though it seems today like you could never heal, there's no way to escape the things you feel. So drink deep of the sorrow, drink deep of the pain. Don't let anybody tell you to get out of the rain. This is your cup, and you're the one who has to drink. Though the taste may go down bitterly, drink deep.
Though the taste may go down bitterly, we still want to dive in. It's like the whole framework and foundation of what we do. So thank you
Well,
again for this time. And I hope that blesses someone who's going through it.
so give me your 1 minute wisdom, the one thing you want people to carry out of this meeting.
That. No. No.
I would say, Jesus says, "My grace is sufficient for you." And I think when you're walking through grief, it's a wonderful time to remember that promise that Jesus is with us. We are not walking alone, and it hurts, but Christ's grace is enough for this and covers this and heals this as well.
And so, Brian, as the newbie on the team, what is What's your elevator speech?
That there's more to life than just hanging on. But the hanging on needs to be understood. So for me, as a songwriter, I've always written from a place of, I'm not enough. I don't feel enough. I'm not in love with me. And to have that journal entry put out into public has freed me and the people that have actually felt the same way. And to be in a place, in an environment, in a ministry that, in a nonprofit that really understands that principle and has been doing it for 25 years, I can't imagine a more, lofty goal to continue this and make it better than it's ever been. So with people like you and those listening, please listen to our stuff, go to our website, share. We would really appreciate that from all the hard work. We know that it's going to change a lot of lives if we keep on sharing it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so honored that you spent some time with me to help get this news out to the grieving people in the world and everybody else who's got lovely, wonderful songs waiting for them on your projects.
Thank you for having us, Barbara. I really appreciate it.
It's good to see you again, Barbara. Tell everybody in
You
Sacramento
too.
hello.
We'll talk to you later.
God
Bye.
bless.
Bye-bye.